Welcome. We're so excited that you're joining us today for our Transformational Leadership virtual event series. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about what transformational leadership actually is. We have a tremendous guest with us here today. His name is Dr. Hal Wright. He's the former superintendent at Huntsville ISD, certainly close to my heart because he's from Texas, he's taught in Texas, and he's led in Texas. And so that makes me so excited to welcome him. And he's got a lot of really great golden nuggets we're going to talk about today. Before we get started, I want to invite you to join the conversation outside of this virtual event, of course, on social media, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever your social media poison of choice is. Make sure you're using these hashtags, hashtag TE virtual events or hashtag TEVE for short. We like to call this must-see TEVE, and today certainly is. I also want to invite you guys to use the chat box. Let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, what you're hoping to learn from today's event. Amelia, our program director, of course, is moderating the chat. Anything that you need to know, you can put in there, and we'll certainly try to get it addressed. Now I want to introduce you to Hal. Hal Wright was, until of August 2017, the superintendent of Huntsville ISD. Prior to this role, he was the deputy superintendent at San Marcos. Go Bobcats, right? I graduated from Texas State University. He was the deputy superintendent at San Marcos CISD and the superintendent of Rockdale ISD and then Rosebud Lot ISD. Hal has extensive experience in K-12 education and can discuss his experiences with STEM, next generation science standards, educational leadership, school finance, and creating a vision for public education in Texas. He has helped prepare both future principals and superintendents for their roles and has participated in the development of a local-based accountability system. Hal has also served as a campus principal, a science teacher, and an athletic coach during his 36-year tenure in public education. Hal has many educators in his family, as 3 of his children are currently public school teachers and his wife is a retired school teacher and counselor. So if anyone is an expert on transformational leadership in a school district setting, it is certainly Dr. Hal Wright. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, what we're going to cover today, this is our agenda for today. We're going to be talking about what transformational leadership looks like in the education system, how to move past the focus on state assessments and really incorporate change into your leadership. And then, of course, he's going to give us some tips and tricks on being the best transformational leader that you can be. So we're really excited to have you with us today. Hal, before we get started, I like to do this fun little thing with our speakers called our 5-star questions for our 5-star leaders. Are you ready for your 5-star questions?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Beach or mountains?
Mountains.
Great. You'll have to come up and visit us here in Canada. Road trips or air travel?
Road trips.
Got it. In-person meetings or virtual meetings?
I prefer in person.
Good. Salty snacks or sweet tooth?
Oh, wow. Salty.
Okay, I like that you had to hesitate on that. Which one are you going to commit to? Okay, salty. And then Twitter or Instagram? Do you have a preference there?
Twitter.
Oh, really? Okay. You'll have to keep me well-versed in Twitter because I don't know it as well as I know Instagram. But anyways, now we know all about you, Hal, both professionally and personally. So we're excited to jump into the interview. You know, of course, we're talking about transformational leadership in the education system today. Talk to me about what it is, how you define it, and then how you can keep from getting sucked into the challenges like state assessments and focusing on just that, and instead keep your head up into that transformational leadership space.
Well, it really starts with one thing. It starts with a belief system and what is it that you believe about why we do what we do. And that's probably the most important thing to begin with, because if you don't have a belief system that supports that type of shift in thinking, or that mindset, then it's going to be very challenging and difficult for you to, I guess, go through the weeds when it gets a little tougher to deal with. It's easy to say and talk about. It's easy to use the word transformational and sometimes misuse it. And so the second thing I would say is that it's important to know what transformation is. And sometimes that's difficult for people because we tend, and it's by, we have experiences that provide us bias. And then we have other things that provide biases to make us continue to do what we've always done. And there are some things out there, and I'm certainly not blaming this on anything, but I can tell you that I think our current accountability system, the way we use assessments, which was not how assessments were intended to be used, but the way we use them for an accountability system ends up preventing us from really transforming, and we just continue to reform. And reform is one thing. That's, you continue to do the same things, you just do it differently. Transformation is you do it completely differently. And I know that people have heard this is pretty much a cliche now, probably since transformation is going on, but the metamorphosis between a caterpillar to a butterfly, a life cycle of a butterfly, that's real transformation. And to put it in that, it's very simple, I guess because I'm a biology person also, so I understand that. But at the same time, it's not so simple when you're used to so much of the same thing. And when you are, and I feel for this, I feel for public education leaders, I feel for our teachers, I even feel for our parents and especially our students who it impacts the most. When you're so zeroed in on making sure kids pass a one-time-a-year assessment that unfortunately has an impact on the type of grade your school's going to receive.
Right.
And, there's no other business that does that.
Yeah.
It's important that we understand that and really understand, what's the purpose of assessment? Why do we assess?
Yeah.
And not get it mixed up with, what's the reason for accountability? And I believe accountability is huge. I believe it is something that it should be. We're a public school, we people a lot of times, and we owe that to the people, our stakeholders, to them to understand those things and understand what it is that we're doing with their tax dollars. And so it's to me, it's important to really report out what is it your kids are doing on a day-to-day basis and not on a once-a-year basis.
Right.
There are new models out there that are really trending. And I was very fortunate before I retired to participate in a group that is redesigning the accountability system. And they're not legislators. They're actually educators. But doing it with very robustly and also understanding what assessments and the purpose of assessments are and developing things that the public can see, like dashboards.
Right.
Really tell you what your kids are doing, what your teachers are doing, and those types of things. Well, that's different. That's closer to a transformation than a reformation. Yeah. Those are small examples, but
let's go back to, you really started as the foundational space is that you have to have a belief system about why you do what you do. Can you talk to me about what your belief system was like, even now as a former educator, and what it was like, especially when you were in district leadership?
Here's the thing. I don't know if my belief system ever changed from the time I became an educator, as far as my real true beliefs and values about how kids learn and why they should learn. Mm-hmm. I always seemed to be one of those kind of teachers that was trying to reach kids and make sure that all of my kids learned and not just the kids that typically got it.
Right.
And it's easier to do that the other way. Mm-hmm. And so I think being a science teacher was really helpful because I could do different things in our class, and it was all about science and all about inquiry and all about learning, all about challenging your mind to think instead of just answering a bunch of questions at the end of the chapter or defining the vocabulary words, which never really taught the vocabulary words, to be honest with you. But as a leader, it becomes a little bit different because now you actually are responsible for not just children, but children, your reports out to parents, your staff, especially as a superintendent, you have teachers, you have directors, you have assistant superintendents that all fall under your guideline. Plus, you work with a school board that's elected, and many times are not public educators.
Right.
And they're actually your boss. At least in Texas, that's the way it's set up. And so it becomes a how do I inform? How do I teach, even as a superintendent? How do I teach my staff? How do I teach our board? And what's the best model and method to do that? And also, it's knowing what is it your community really wants? What's important to your community? And when you start to ask questions to your community, it can be very surprising, because I was able to do that in 2 different districts. One, which you're familiar with, in San Marcos, and one time in Huntsville, where we really asked the community to tell us what they thought was important for their graduates. And, which really meant, how do we start and how do we finish with your child in our school district? And that's the kind of questions we asked. And what were our highest hopes for our graduates? And I think that was the most important questions we could ask. And what we found out was no one ever said we wanted to pass the state test. Not one person. That wasn't their highest hope for their children. They really wanted their kids to be able to be thinkers, to be able to find information. They wanted their kids to be able to talk to other people and to demonstrate what they were capable of doing to others. And whether they went to college or whether they went on to a profession, it didn't matter. They wanted their kids to be able to do those things. And that was essential for how we structured our goals in our district. And those goals led to transformational processes to be put into place. But all of it is a sequence of events that you've got to lay out for people, that you have to make sure that they are participating, because we need to be transparent. We need to be able to ask our community, what is it you really want? And then what partnerships we develop from that, and with who, so that we can achieve those goals and find people who are like-minded, but at the same time, find people who question what we're doing and making sure that we're staying on track.
Yeah, I think that that's great, because what you're really describing is when you did ask the parents and external stakeholders about what their highest hopes were for the students of the district, the things that came up from asking that open-ended question really align with what your belief system was as an educator. It wasn't these things about state assessments or passing this arbitrary test. It really was about making sure they were critical thinkers, they were contributing members of society, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think having that foundational belief system across all stakeholders within a district helped you lead to that transformation like you described. I'm curious to know that you talk about this sequence of events that's necessary to identify the right partners, to ensure you're on the right page with everyone. Talk to me a little bit about, as a superintendent, once you were able to establish that kind of collective belief system with these parents and these partners in these educational settings, what did you do? What did your day-to-day look like to ensure that you were not getting bogged down in that? Or what did you need to think about it from a big picture perspective, but in your day-to-day practices, how did you ensure that you stayed in that transformational state?
So this becomes when you're learning about leadership, you're always going to learn something about management.
Yeah.
And I've stayed away from that word.
Yeah.
But good leaders also do this, and it is a management technique, is you've got to be able to plan out what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and what you promise people you're going to do, and then put it on a calendar. And make sure that you know that is so important, that you're part of your belief system. It's so important that you're going to make sure that you adhere to that calendar. And that becomes sometimes tricky, because in schools, there's always things that come up, but at the same time, there's always something to do. And to include those other partners, you also have to make sure that you work with their calendars. And so that became it became great, because people that sometimes you rely on, you can put everything onto an electronic calendar, but invite people through that. That doesn't guarantee that that's going to happen. And so people like my secretary were influential in making sure that those things happened, and that they connected with people to make sure the right partners were there at the right time, so that we could have this conversation. And we were able to do a lot of things with our university that was in the town. It was a little bit smaller than Texas State. It was in Houston State, so that was in our town. But they were very willing and in fact went out of their way to make sure these happen. We also had some business partners with Google and Apple that were very willing. And those, and that, when I say we, I'm talking about our entire community, this whole group, the university, us, and it really made it worthwhile and really neat, I guess, to watch these partnerships grow and how they interacted with us and the things that they offered, because they were willing to take a step out there and they needed a format to do so. And this was one way for us to do that. And it got our kids some experiences. Dell was another big partner. It got our kids some experiences that maybe they would have never had. And that's really the ultimate goal. Is what are your children in your school going to experience? And what are they going to learn from this? Because it's not about, is the school district doing this? Because that's an entity. It's
Right.
the kids learning, and are they really having opportunities that will not just prepare them for right now, but also for their own future. And we continue to focus on that. And that's what our community told us they want us to do.
Mm-hmm. And is that the question you constantly asked yourself as a superintendent, like before you went to bed each night? Is that your kind of moral compass, your kind of North Star metric about whether or not you're being successful as a leader in education?
Yes, is how do we impact children?
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's the pre-K students or whether it is our high school seniors or even our students who were in college that were in dual credit type things, and the relationships we were building with Sam Houston at the time to do some really neat things. But those were things that were important. And that was the big picture things I went to bed with. The small picture thing, I'll say small picture, the more immediate things I went to bed with, were things like, hey, are all my kids protected? And are all my teachers okay? Are all my other staff members okay? Those were things that worried me on a day-to-day basis. And I know that when I say worried me, they were things that concerned me, right, that I also spent time with that was important. And those are the kind of things sometimes that just come up at the spur of the moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to address things, unfortunately, between adults and children, and know that the children that we serve are really the most important thing. So it became a conflict between adult wants and children needs. Children needs always had to win out, and that sometimes was not popular.
Yeah, right. That's great. I think you're right. I think that these questions that you're describing that you've been asking yourself are such a good way for some of our new superintendents or new educational leaders, really any teacher, if they are trying to establish what their belief system is and articulate it, being able to lean on the things that you're describing. Am I making a positive impact in the lives of my students? Are my kids protected? Are my teachers taken care of? All of these, I think, are really great self-reflective questions for our attendees who are listening today to decide on exactly where they land in regards to their belief system as an educator to ensure that they're creating that transformation like you're describing rather than just reforming things. So I'm really curious to know, we talked a little bit about some tips and tricks, and one of the things too that you added was, I love this and I'm going to take this with me, is that if you prioritize it, then you should put it on your calendar. I think that that's so important because a lot of people live and die by the calendars. I'm certainly one of those people. And if I'm making a priority about a particular thing or a particular partnership, I make sure I create that space in my life and on my calendar. And so I really love that tip. Are there any other tips and tricks that you give to these new superintendents, to new principals, that help keep them in this transformational leadership state?
Well, I think you have to always be listening as well. It's not just always about what you say. You have to learn as an individual. You have to participate with groups of like-minded leaders. But at the same time, you also have to listen to your folks, because you might have these community meetings, but they were spaced out in time. But you also had to listen to what was going on in your district on an immediate basis to hear what those voices were. And in my opinion, I think it was essential for a district leader to know what was going on in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. I say we did that. I hate to use the word I most of the time. We did that, but I was a part of that. And we made sure that we conducted classroom walkthroughs, not as an evaluation as far as a teacher's performance, but are these things taking place? And if they're taking place in certain classrooms, let's make sure we go see those and make sure that people know about them so they can learn from others. The other thing that I did was I tried to include kids in a lot of things. And one of the, probably I was really fortunate, and I was able to utilize a position in our district that we ended up hiring a guy that used to work as a work in the film industry.
Nice.
And he understood how to really develop videos. And so we use short, minute and a half, 2 minutes the longest videos to make sure that people across our community, whoever wanted to watch them, could see them, because it was on our website, could see what it was that our goals were, what our community said, how they answered those questions, but even more importantly, what our kids thought about and how they defined them. And so we even had some videos where our kids actually told us what they thought those goals meant and how they felt like it could impact their learning. And we use children from anywhere from our intermediate school level, which was 5th and 6th grade, all the way up to, of course, high school students. And it was interesting to hear those stories and hear what they had to say. Those children, by the way, those same age students participated in our community forums. We asked them to specifically to be on panels, and so people could hear from children what it was that they were looking for in their learning experiences. And that's what we're about. And so I don't know if that's transformational, but it helped us to continue on this process of being transformational. Now, I'll also say that when you walk into our classrooms, a lot of them still look like the same old classrooms. But I'll also tell you that there were teachers that were interested, and some teachers that took it beyond what I could ever imagine. And we encouraged them to feel like they could step away. And I know in districts, when you're forced to focus on a state assessment, you're also kind of forced into a curriculum with a scope and sequence, and you got to make sure you're at this place all the time. Well, we gave people permission to step away from that as long as they continue to use the state standards in their learning environments. And we had to be very cognizant of what was going on in those classrooms and very weary, because the reality is, as much as I don't like how those assessments are used, they're still used.
Right.
And we also had to be aware of that, and we had to find ways to address it. What I will tell you is that part of this transformation is, what do I do to wade my feet in both waters? Because I got to keep it in this compliance, which is what I call the assessment and accountability system that's currently out there. And then how do I meet our kids' needs, our real kids' needs, not just the ones that the state says and the federal government says you should have, but what do our kids really need? Yeah. That's a different story sometimes. And when you go back to that question, is you have to make time in your day, in your calendar, in your week to address those things. And you have to have people who are willing to go along with you, that understand that vision.
I think that that's really great too, because what you're talking about, that kind of keeping your feet in both of those waters, the accountability assessment water, and then of course balancing that with the needs of the students. I think as a former teacher too, it really I think speaks to how engaged your teachers are that you're describing when you go into these classrooms. You would recognize that they had to be accountable to the state assessments, but you gave them the creativity to kind of take it a bit further and ensure that they were meeting the needs of their students. And I think as an educational leader, by making it a priority to visit the classrooms, you were able to kind of keep a pulse on ensuring that both things were being met. And as a teacher, I know when your creativity is kind of stripped away from you, and sometimes the passion can wane for what you're doing. And so I love that you made it such a priority to recognize that everyone's healthier, students, staff, teachers, leadership, if we just try to balance and navigate both of those waters, the needs of the students and of course the state assessments. So congratulations on doing that so successfully. I know it's an everyday battle, but it sounds like you guys were doing some really innovative things to ensure that you're staying in that transformational state rather than the reformation state. So I want to open up the dialogue now to all of our attendees, Hal. I think that You know, you've shared with us a bunch of really great nuggets of wisdom, and now I'm sure the attendees have a ton of questions for you. So if you'll notice, Amelia just posted a link to the exchange in the chat box. I'm also going to share my screen with you all so that you can see how we can get into there. Another way, if you don't want to use the link in the chat box, you can also use your mobile device. All you have to do is open up your camera, zoom in on the QR code, a little prompt will pop down, and when it does, you just click on it. It'll take you right into the exchange. Or the third way you can join, of course, is to go to thoughtexchange.com/join and enter the 9-digit code that you see here on the screen. Once you're in there, you don't have to sign up for anything. All you have to do is agree to the terms of use, and then you're in. The question that we have for today's exchange is, what thoughts or questions do you have for Hal? You know, whatever burning questions you've been thinking about while he's been discussing all of his experiences with us, please make sure you share it in the exchange. After you've shared something, you'll go into the STAR step. Part of the STAR step is really exciting, is that you get to see the thoughts and questions of the other people who are in attendance to today's virtual event. Each thought and question will pop up and you get to rate it. You can rate 5 if you really love it. You definitely want to hear this question from Hal, or you can rate it on a scale from 1 to 5, and you go down to 1 if it's not something that you feel a burning desire to hear about. Rate that one a little lower. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do all of that, to share, and then to star everyone's thoughts and questions. And then we'll meet back here to go through the top thoughts report, which is the prioritized list, of course, of questions and thoughts with Hal, so he can address those with you all. In order for you to participate, I'm going to need to be quiet. So I'm going to do that for just a few minutes. And then me and Hal will meet you right back here after that. So are you ready to dive into these questions?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. I saw this one actually twice, so people really are interested to know what your thoughts are on this. Do you have any book recommendations that have helped you become a transformational leader?
Oh, wow. Yes, I do. I will also tell you, this is not a book. It's actually a document that superintendents and leaders in Texas put together. They actually put this together about the time I became a superintendent.
Okay.
It's called Creating a New Vision for Public Education in Texas.
Oh, I love that. Create
Yes.
a new vision for public education in Texas.
Yes, and you can Google. You don't even have to go to the old website to do it. You can just Google it; it's going to come up. It is a. It's not a how-to document, by the way. It's a document that states. It actually goes into your belief system and what your belief system is, and it makes statements that these leaders came up with based off of some of the questions they were faced with at the time. And so, you know, you can tell it's old because you even see things in there like, oh my gosh, what was the before Facebook?
MySpace?
MySpace, yes, that's in there because that was new at the time, and kids were using it. And so, and it's not like they said you ought to use this. They just said those types of things ought to be available.
Right.
And some of their, they broke it down to 6 major categories. But it's interesting because it's written it's written with a, it's interesting because it's written with a focus on the Declaration of Independence.
Oh.
So it's really interesting to see how that became a document that they used to develop this, I don't want to call it a guide, but call it these ideas about transformational, about transformation in school. So anyway, that was interesting. Some other books, there's some books that I used to read on change, and I think that's important. The change process is understanding that. I'm trying to think of the authors. I don't have them up here with me in my office because I've just kind of moved up here recently.
Yeah.
I will also tell you there's a good book on accountability that helps you think about accountability as a transformational leader by John Tanner.
Tanner. Yes, I know him.
You know him?
I do. Yeah, he's great. I've seen him many times. He's fantastic.
He is, and he provides some very helpful thoughts, and he's actually a part of this accountability system change in Texas, building a new accountability.
Yeah.
Yes. and understanding assessments. He's an expert on that, so it's not like he's just somebody who comes up and says, hey, I think this is the wrong thing to do. He's a
Right.
person that actually put these tests together
Mm-hmm.
at one time, these national tests. And so he understands what to do and what not to do, and what they should not be used for and what they should be used for.
Right.
He does get that. You know, I wish I'd have had a list of books that I can think of. We used a lot in some of our, I'll refer to that when I had mentors who utilized a lot of readings and things like that. So we use things like Drive, we wanted to make sure that we, as leaders, this group of us, that we stayed. We also looked outside the education world.
Yeah.
That we looked at how leadership and how thinking was taking place in other places. So there were some pretty good books there.
That's great. No, I think you're right. I love that you talked about creating a new vision for public school education, or for public education in Texas. And then, of course, anything by John Tanner, I certainly recommend too. I think that those are great places to start. I want to dive into this next question. I'm curious to know what you think about this. Are state assessments necessary? Do you think they'll ever be phased out?
So I want to go back to this whole idea about local accountability. And I think it's important that we're able to, as districts, to report out what our kids are learning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that a state assessment is necessary. I think guidelines from a state might be necessary in districts, because they're in Texas, they're independent school districts. Why can't they choose what works for their kids? And I'm talking about state-approved assessments.
Of course.
I think there's got to be some kind of guideline is that these assessments are necessary, but what kind should you be using?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this once time a year type thing tells us a whole lot. I think an adaptive assessment that tells us a whole lot more, and also more frequent assessments may tell us a whole lot more. And when we use the word assessments, we got to remember that's not always a written test. Right. And so assessments can be multiple types of assessments, and assessments are necessary, whether it's a project assessment, whether it's a written assessment, whether it's an oral assessment, whatever it must be, they're necessary, because that's how we know when kids are learning. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe it's assessments to be phased out, but I think there may eventually be enough pressure that the idea that a one-time state assessment may be phased out. I would hope so anyway.
Yeah.
Got to understand the political climate, and I don't mind saying this, the financing and the money behind assessments and who's involved with those. And what I'm also starting to notice is some of those companies are also changing, knowing that this is probably coming down the pike, and they're changing because they want to still be a company. Yeah. And so what can we offer? And so you're starting to see more and more things out of those companies that are that kind of provide a view into where a student is with an adaptive assessment, and where they're going, what their growth is. And also, here's a prescription of work that you can do using our tools for where that student is. So you're starting to see that some out there, or actually you're seeing a lot.
That's so great. Do you have any resources to share with us regarding leadership? Any good books you recommend? We talked about that one. Do you see any benefit in state assessments? I think you touched on this one a little, Hal, about how you do see the benefit and the necessity to, of course, take an assessment of how the kids are doing. It's really the kinds of assessments. I want to touch into this one, though. What is the best piece of leadership advice that you've ever been given?
Oh, wow. I think the best advice that I've got is always to make sure that you are a person of integrity.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that you also make sure that you're listening. Be more of a listener than just and appreciate the people that are talking, whether they agree with you or not, whether they're a board member, whether they are a educator, whether they're a parent, or whether they're a child. Listen and hear what they have to say, and make sure that you're authentic about your response. You're not doing some kind of canned response. Just be authentic and be yourself. That's probably the best thing I can say is be yourself.
That's great. We've got time for one more question. And I think this is a big one. I'm glad we're going to end here. What is the biggest challenge facing superintendents today?
Oh my gosh, that's a biggest challenge.
Biggest challenge.
Oh, you know, I can, and it hasn't been that long ago, but I remember that I don't know if I identified one,
Okay.
but I will tell you that probably making sure you can tread through the waters of
Mhm.
meeting your kids' needs and also meeting the requirements and then communicating that to people. That's, I think, the biggest challenge is communication.
Yeah.
Superintendents some are great communicators, but it's
Right.
always difficult to communicate because communication modes have changed so much since when I started,
Mhm.
obviously. And even since when you started, Angel, since you were in school.
Absolutely.
I mean, the whole idea of how it's changed and how fast it changes and how fast the information gets out there, I've, understanding how to get a hold of that and understand it and address it. It's all a big issue is that communication piece.
Yeah, I think most of our superintendents who are watching today would absolutely 100% agree with you. I have to just take a minute to say thank you so much for today, Hal. It's been so lovely. We don't often get an opportunity to pick the brain of someone who's got such an amazing, tenure of educational leadership like yourself. So I'm so grateful that you joined us today.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, guys, if you need to get in touch with Dr. Halry, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I can certainly connect you with him. As a reminder, we'll be sending out a link to this virtual event. If you want to share it far and wide with all the educational leaders in your network or in your district or organization. And then, of course, we'll also have a link to the exchange that we ran today that you can share as well. We're so appreciative for you to join us today, and we can't wait to see you at the next one. So we'll see you then. Thanks, Al.